So my name's Jamie Emmitt. I'm a senior product specialist here at Datto. We are a company, a vendor that provides technologies to help managed service providers like Edge IT Systems really provide you with services and technology to keep obviously yourselves agile with the tech, but more importantly protected as well and safe. So we're going to talk really around securing data and of course your critical data wherever it lives. And I've got my colleague with me, Simon Bell, as well, who will be jumping on at the end of the day. And he's actually going to show us through a live ransomware attack. So a contained ransomware attack, but of one of our systems, and showing how we can help get you out of a sticky situation. So we're going to jump straight in and talk really around the concerns around data, really, the focuses that you want to be looking at. And as I think everyone can probably relate to on here, the key three areas that we find when you're thinking around, your IT and your security posturing of your data is, of course, the threat landscape. What does that look like? Obviously, staying informed with your partners like Edge. Compliance, we've already heard it a couple of times throughout today about GDPR being obviously top of subject, but there's various different compliance formats and intricacies in each one that you need to make sure that we're sticking to. And as always, and I've heard this a few times there as well, budgetary concerns. It needs to try and match somewhere across all three: protection, compliance, and obviously making sure it's something that can work from a commercial standpoint as well. So really where Datto focuses and where we've expanded over time is our core business in essence is around what we call business continuity, which is really recovery element of a framework of security to make sure that actually it's your last line of defense. But over time, we've seen that really the key three elements where, the bad guys are trying to get into your organization is through email, which more often than not is Microsoft 365 today, endpoints, so through the machines themselves, laptops, PCs, and your servers, and of course network as well. Datto's built a portfolio. We work with Edge to help organizations like yourself stay protected. And really our focus has come from an adoption we took a few years ago now around the NIST security framework. So there's many different security frameworks out there, the Cyber Essentials and such. Vast majority of them, including Cyber Essentials, actually come from an adaptation of the NIST framework. So they're all very similar in essence, but Datto ourselves use the NIST framework. Now that's both firstly in terms of our internal processes and security to make sure first and foremost we're protected so we can protect our customers in turn, but also in terms of how we built a portfolio of solutions to help companies like Edge really give you guys the services you need. And that starts from, identifying everything you have. Where is your data footprint living today? Where does it reside? Through to protecting those kind of, endpoints and data standpoints, detecting the threats that are trying to come in, having a response in place with your IT partner Edge to make sure if something happens, you've got a plan ready to go. And ultimately that last line of defense, like I mentioned, having a recovery strategy in place should the worst case scenarios happen. So this shouldn't look too dissimilar for you here. It's very much the way of the world in today's, digital world. I know it's coined quite a lot, that phrase, but we truly are in that stage now. And we have your critical data and your applications for running all up the top there. And as we can see, today's world is that they are sat in disparate locations. There isn't a one silo to protect now in terms of all of your critical data residing there. We've got, of course, your servers that are on site, private clouds, public clouds like Azure, SaaS applications like Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace, and of course your endpoints. We all need to work from a machine somewhere, and having the protection layers in place there, and ultimately Edge hopefully helping you with as much of that as possible. So when we start to scale this into connecting it to the NIST framework as example, we're going to want to identify where all of that data is sitting first and foremost. We're going to want to protect that with various different technologies. So that's advanced endpoint securities, mail securities for your Microsoft 365, endpoint security solutions in place, having the same kind of detection levels for inbound threats and those within as well, and ultimately having a good response in place with Edge, and ultimately that last line of defense wherever your data sits. And there's a slight segmentation here already. Because we have to have our thoughts in two ways. Do we need to just have protection of the data or the data and the platform? Well, when we're looking at traditional on-premise servers, we want to protect not just the data, but being able to have some uptime. And actually, if your systems do go down or hardware failure, how do we work in the meantime while we're looking for replacements and such? So having a strategy around a continuity model. When we look into things like SaaS applications, we're more concerned with the data itself, having an ability to maintain that data and ultimately recall it as and when required. Now, the reason for this thought process in the vast majority is because the landscape of our environments today have changed from yesteryear to now. We used to be more concerned with accidental deletions internally, the human error element, hardware failure, natural disasters. And although all of those still are a present danger today, the landscape of the priorities or the biggest threats have really changed. Ransomware is one that we'll probably talk about a lot. It's something that's in the headlines all the time. Unfortunately, it's prolific. Stricter regulations. Actually, we talked about it already. GDPR in place for really everyone. I think on this call should be and is concerned with GDPR and making sure compliance is maintained. And then actually, I think what's the biggest one that I haven't really put too much emphasis on here. We talked about data sitting in multiple locations. Well, wherever that data goes, so does the biggest threat to that data, which is us, the people using it. And that's one we can't get away from. The biggest reason, I think the last statistic was about 90% of data loss events. Root cause is the people using the data, whether that's accidental deletion, deliberate in some instances, wanting to make deletions before exiting a business or before something's found out. It happens. Clicking that link. Quite often the bad guys need to wade in, and unfortunately too frequently that's the people within the organizations are that route in. So wherever the data is sitting, unfortunately the biggest threats and kind of the growing threats reside around us using the data. A catch-22 in many ways. So what does that threat look like? Well, we don't really need to look that far. And in fact, quite often when I come to local events, all I need to do to bring up something relevant is type in a postcode or a town and ransomware into Google, and headlines will be thrown up from various different locations. So we don't have to look very far to see that there's various different attacks happening almost on a daily basis now. And in fact, this one that's just popped up here, the HSE attack, which is the Irish Health Service last year, hit by ransomware. And I think it was their IT director, don't quote me on that one, it was one of their senior IT staff, mentioned that actually the attack had set them back by about 20 years, both in terms of records and actually IT systems themselves and rebuilding that. Because they didn't have a true defense mechanism in place. So the threats are ever growing. And what do these ransomware attacks look like when they actually, take hold? Well, a survey done by a cybersecurity specialist last year found that actually, just under half of UK businesses have actually been hit by ransomware to date. Out of that, half of those again paid the ransom, which we would advise, by the way, you never do. One of the reasons for that is that actually only a third of those that paid the ransom ever got their data back. So that's the first scary part. The second part is if you are one of those fortunate enough to get your data back, if you followed down this road, you're then marked as a, in inverted commas, paying customer on the dark web. So the likelihood is you're going to be targeted in anywhere between a year and 18 months time, because they know you're someone that if you get hit, gets paid, and they know how to hit you. So the effects of these can be truly devastating and ongoing across time if there's not some sort of plan and strategy in place around tackling these kind of events. And ultimately, what does it cost? What does this look like? Well, first and foremost, we understand the cost of losing the data in its entirety, but also there's that downtime element. What happens while we can't operate because we're waiting for that data to come back, that infrastructure to be brought back online? Well, this is an example I worked with Chris on just to have a look at some maybe more relatable numbers for those on the call today. But looking here, 5 members of staff, just over half a terabyte of data. We use the recovery time calculator that you guys can work with Edge and the team to find out what it's like for yourselves. But it worked out at over 6,500 for one instance of downtime and waiting for data to get back. And that's quite quantifiable based on things like salary and things like that we can literally mathematically work out. Now, the real danger is what that doesn't incorporate is what we call the macroeconomic elements of these kind of downtime events. And that's things like breach of compliance. We've already mentioned GDPR, not being able to fulfill your commitments there. And actually, I've mentioned Hiscox here because Hiscox, for those that don't know, are a cyber security insurer, amongst a few other things. And they've actually quantified this unquantifiable number. So they offer cyber security insurance for these kind of cyber attacks that may occur. And they insure for starting about 500,000 and up for even small businesses. So they put a number on what really is quite hard to quantify in a lot of instances. So it's a lot of cost, not just to say a lot of impact to projects and actually work practicality as well. So among the downtime threats, the biggest one I see being an offender today for small to medium businesses is ransomware. And that comes from the fact that we actually work with over 18,000 managed service providers globally. And we survey them on an annual basis to actually find out what are they seeing in terms of this kind of environment. And as you can see, there's some pretty big numbers there of the rise of ransomware attacks, particularly in the last few years. And it's those kind of attacks that have the biggest impact to downtime and actually being able to not operate during these periods of time that an attack does occur. And that's really why we say here at Datto and why we use the word business continuity rather than just backup. If you rewind 10 years ago, I think a lot of the conversations were about having a backup in place, being able to get your data back if it was something were to happen to it. And that's really the focus of backup. It's to minimize data loss. But again, in today's digital world, unfortunately, the time it can take between the loss of the data and recovering it can be just as deadly and just as impactful. And that's what we call downtime. And for some people, that can be hours if you're using a Datto technology with Edge, or for others, unfortunately, that can be days or weeks and truly have a detrimental impact as a result there. So again, while I was talking to Chris in the run up to today's event, something he wanted me to touch on in particular and talk about, and I think it's an important one because it's not necessarily talked about enough, is the focus around this area in particular, SaaS applications. And the most commonly ones we see used are the likes of Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. And for us in Europe and certainly the UK, Microsoft 365 tends to be king. So what's happening around the data that's moving in there? Well, I think, again, this is one that's been utilized quite a lot, an evolution of SaaS data. Where does that critical data live and how much of it is inside these applications? And it's no surprise, and everyone's probably heard this a million times already, that, the adoption of SaaS applications has grown faster than ever. And even if we think back to prior to the pandemic, Google Drive was hitting over 1 billion users. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit. And what we saw out of that from a technology standpoint in SaaS applications was a huge increase in utilization. In fact, inside of a 4-month period, we saw just shy of 900% growth of Microsoft Teams from a global standpoint. Now, that's a huge increase and not entirely or at all really surprising. We all of a sudden found ourselves working from home, having to still have meetings both internally and with customers and calls and such. So it's no surprise that happened, but there was a massive side effect that has a lot of advantages, but has also left open some vulnerabilities. And that is the access to all the other cool tools that are in Microsoft 365. We're talking SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams and sharing there. And what we found is actually during that adoption and the usage for essentially your staff to be using these platforms, we've not seen the same amount of due diligence and really care to the data that's living there as we have on the traditional on-premise. And part of that is we've lost track of where our data is sitting. In the reality, vast majority of your data is either probably traversing through, if not outright living in Microsoft 365 now. And most people are just not aware that that's the case inside their own organization. So we know more and more data is moving into these applications, but is that data vulnerable? Well, spoiler alert, yes, it is. We're going to take a look at why that is the case. Threats are growing in this space at an exponential rate. And again, we do these surveys to our partners to really get a pulse check of what they're seeing. And there's huge startling numbers of increases in ransomware in Microsoft 365. So again, this is the first kind of myth I guess I'll debunk. A lot of people think that ransomware attacks are for endpoint machines or on-premise servers. No, ransomware is also present in Microsoft 365 accounts. In fact, the cyber criminals are developing it vastly for this area. And there's a good reason for them to be doing that. Unfortunately, everything I'm telling you so far, they're fully aware of. Their main goal is to take enough of your data to make it painful enough for you to want to pay them some money. And they're seeing more and more data move into this platform, and they've seen not the same level of care of that data as it is on your on-premise environments with multiple security levels, a backup and business continuity strategy in place. And so it's become low-hanging fruit, which is why we see 1 of 4 of our partners have had customers that have been attacked in this way. So it's a huge risk element right now, and it's very much become a case of don't just take our word for it, both from Edge and from myself here at Datto today. You don't have to look far to see pretty much any industry expert out there saying the same thing, whether it's Gartner or other vendors in the similar spaces like Symantec. All of them are seeing huge growth of attacking Microsoft 365 and SaaS applications, and not necessarily enough awareness or enough protection over the data sitting in these areas. Now that's really brought home by the fact that actually, well, where does the responsibility lie? Who's responsible for the data if it's in this Microsoft platform? And a lot of people can be forgiven to think, well, my data's with Microsoft, you couldn't get much of a bigger brand and a bigger technology partner to work with. What could possibly go wrong? And the reality comes down to, well, what's the responsibility from Microsoft versus your responsibility? And we call this the dual responsibility model here at Datto, and it delineates the difference between the two. So you've got the first on the left there from Microsoft, and they're responsible for hardware failure, software failure, natural disaster, power outage. What does that really mean? That means that they're responsible for giving you access to the platform. When you want to log into that platform, you're able to access that platform. In other words, uptime of the platform. That's their responsibility. What are you responsible for as a user of that platform? Human error, programmatic errors, malicious insiders, external hackers, virus malware. Again, to put it into layman's, you're responsible for the integrity and the safety of that data. And I think that's a big point that actually hasn't been made too clear historically for users of the platform. So Microsoft did make it abundantly clear, and they've actually got in their service level agreement, and you can see it at the bottom there. We recommend that you regularly back up your content and data that you store using services or third-party application services like you can get from Edge IT and vicariously then Datto. So Microsoft themselves are telling you, you need to protect your data in this way. It's down to you. You're responsible for it. You need to make sure that you're doing your due diligence here. So again, Edge IT systems are able to offer you solutions around this, one of which is our Datto SaaS protection. And really that's designed to back up the entirety of the data inside of your Microsoft 365 information. So if you have that scenario where I think I heard Chris mentioning a while ago an example of if a clerk decided to leave the organization and perhaps was, let's say, over ambitious with cleaning up and got rid of a few too many files, and it's things that you might have needed or something that got into public domain and need to be called back on. Well, you want to make sure that you're able to get that data if there has been a deletion event, or even one of those more nefarious encryption events from a ransomware attack. And Datto and Edge help you do this. It's backing up and it's connected automatically via Edge. They will connect and protect all your users. It will then do those backups on 3 times a day, so automation built in, so you're not having to rely on input in that scenario. And it's that last line of defense against ransomware, being able to restore from a point in time before it hit your domain and your data. But it's also going to protect, as we can see down the bottom there, more than just email, which is traditionally where the biggest concern has been, but not really where the most data sits today. It's going to capture OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams and tasks, all the critical areas of your domain that your data is sitting, able to be recovered as you need it. And that could be down to the simple file and folder scenario, someone deleting something they need to recall back on, or it could be restoring the entire domain of data across an entire user, across an entire organization. So really being able to capture that data back and do that. And really the key difference, I guess, here in that respect is that, it's protecting against that permanent data loss event, recovering from ransomware if that ever unfortunately happens. And we are in unfortunately a day and age now where it's when that happens rather than if, from a numbers game, and getting you up and running fast should those scenarios occur. Ultimately, it's reducing the risk to you, and it can even be used as a way of saving costs. If you have people leave the organization, if you delete their Microsoft account, you lose all the data associated as well. So at a much reduced cost through Edge, you can actually keep that data, but make a saving on your Microsoft licensing as well. So it's a great way of maintaining costs and controlling that element of budgetary side as well. So I want to give time to Simon to actually run through the demo again today. So I'm just going to summarize a few main points that we talked about here, and what I would also suggest would be good practices when you're looking internally at a framework of protecting your organization. The first and foremost is always, train users. And I think, again, I heard a moment ago, someone didn't click on a link. Fantastic example, right? Training users and keeping this dialogue open is a great way of making sure that your staff don't fall for the obvious traps. They are the biggest inroads to malware getting into your organization. Deploying multiple layers of security. Recovery is one layer of that. You need to have your layers on top of anti phishing attacks, examples like that. Having, business continuity, not just backup. Considering the downtime event, not just the data loss, and making sure you're protected in that aspect. Having a testing format in place. I know this is something that Edge offer and support a lot of their customers in, but making sure that you actually have a rehearsed model. The technology and the products you have in place only work as well as they're tested to make sure that you can use them. Storing multiple copies of your data is a must, and in disparate locations, absolutely. And ultimately knowing your cost and the impact should you go through any of these downtime events. Now, the reason we partner with Edge is that they're able to do all of this for you and ultimately, help you against that fight. But I think what would be worthwhile now is having a look through an example with Simon, who's going to share his screen momentarily. And he is going to show us through a ransomware demo. Myself will be staying on the call for once Simon's finished, and we'll field any questions you guys might have at all. But thank you for your time, and I'll share over to Simon. You have the stage, sir.
Thanks very much, Jamie, and hello everyone. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. And hopefully you can see my screen. It should be a desktop. If you give me a thumbs up, Jamie, that'd be amazing. Excellent. Okay, welcome everyone. So my name is Simon Bell. What I'm going to take you through today is Jamie's talked a lot about how ransomware is quite destructive, and you hear a lot about it in the news as well. But people actually rarely get to see, unless you're a victim of attack, of course, of how destructive this actual software can be. So what we do today is we're going to actually infect this PC that you see in front of me. Sorry, Chris, I am actually sharing a desktop here on this one. And what I'll do is actually infect this PC. And this PC is being backed up by Datto's technology. And this is sort of like a backup and business continuity for sort of local servers and PCs and such like. Now, Jamie's obviously talked a lot about Office 365 backup. And what I'm going to try and explain to you how easy it is for your PC, your endpoint, your servers, and then obviously onto things like OneDrive and Teams becoming infected with ransomware. So the first thing is I've got a normal PC here. I've got some documents. So if I have a quick look, I've got some documents here. If I open up, got some documents that I work on. I've got a fairly standard desktop. I might have some icons here on my desktop. Now what I'm going to do is actually going to create a text document. Just to show you, it is not the smoke and mirrors type, and actually put some information out. What I'm going to do is just actually put in current time and date, so we know exactly what it was. So almost 20 to 3, and we'll actually save that document. Now, this person obviously is an accountant, likes to keep their documents fairly neat. But what I'm going to do is just in the background, what I'm doing is just taking a backup of this system. Okay, so basically backups can happen on this system up to every 5 minutes if you so need, or an hour. It's entirely up to you how often these backups take place. The more frequent you do backups these days, the easier it is to recover, especially from something like ransomware. Now, what I'm going to do here is actually go through the system. We're going to have a look at the sort of like the documents, again, the documents. But what I've actually noticed is that on my document, I've actually got this Excel spreadsheet. Now, this Excel spreadsheet I'm not familiar with. I don't understand how it's got onto my desktop. And we talk about how data gets onto a person's machine. And if you think about, it could be a USB drive, it could be a download from a network drive, it could be, come in via email. Someone shared that document with you via email. It could be shared by Teams. There's so many ways for a document to get onto your PC. Now, I was also quite pleased to hear that something looked a bit odd, so didn't click on the links. And the same goes for ransomware as well. If there's a document that you don't understand, you don't click on it. Call Edge. That's what they're there for. They can talk you through. Even if you're unsure, please don't click on things you don't know what are there. And it's the same with documents as well as those sort of malformed links. Now I'm going to be that. I'm going to actually I'm actually going to click on this document, and if I actually open up this, it's opening Excel, and it's a payroll tool of some description. I'm not familiar with it. I don't understand what this particular spreadsheet is or where it came from, and I thought, okay, it's a bit strange. And so what am I going to do? Oh, hang on. As you can see, this piece of this Excel spreadsheet was actually infected with ransomware. Now, if anyone's seen any ransomware, what it does, it starts very, very quickly to encrypt all your files. So those files, I'm just going to actually just close this down now. if you're not quite sure what ransomware actually does. So basically what it does is a program, it will actually run in the background, and it will actually start looking for all your files and will encrypt them. Now, as Jamie said, what happens then is this is a service, there's a company at the end of this, and they feel they're doing you a favor by encrypting your data. Well, that's not the case. And as Jamie said, you should never ever pay these guys. What it's doing is, and how to pay it, is they're actually using Bitcoin. So if you're familiar with Bitcoin, digital currency, it makes it more or less untraceable. It's getting better to trace Bitcoin these days, but it's more or less untraceable. So you're paying somebody you don't know, probably in a different country, and it'd be very, very hard, even if it didn't give you the right key to unlock all this data. Now, as I've been talking, what it's actually been doing is actually encrypting all the data in the background. So if I'm going to go to my documents now, as you can see, it's all changed. It's actually got this .etc extension. Now, that's on my PC. What most of this ransomware will actually do is look for every available network connection. So that could be your local server. I used to work for an MSP myself, an IT provider, and I saw a ransomware attack internally. Unfortunately, if somebody clicked on the wrong thing, and it was actually it destroyed about 2,000 items in about 5 minutes. It just shows you how quick it is and very difficult to stop. Now, what I'm going to do here is that if you've got your OneDrive, as an example here, if I'm actually syncing with my OneDrive, those changes are all now going up to the OneDrive. So your OneDrive is now infected as well. Now, Data's got technology that we can actually restore all those files, because obviously it's not Microsoft's responsibility. So we can restore them within the Office 365, or if you're using Google Workplace as well. So I mean, and that's it. Now, if we go back to that document that I actually had, which was this file, this text file here, and if I actually open it, now I can't open it with Notepad anymore, but if I actually open it because it's been encrypted, if I actually edit with, we'll go for Notepad here, we'll go for Notepad and look at it, and as you can see, that data is now encrypted. I can't get that data. At this point, most people just break down crying because all that data has now gone, and it's a very scary thing to see. So what I'm going to do, because this actual machine has been being backed up, and we've been backing up Office 365, this will, because we're backing up every 5 minutes, the nice thing about this will already be alerting Edge IT, the good folks there, and they'll probably know about it before you do in terms of alerting on that. And they can actually start putting in the remedial process to get you guys back up and running, which is quite important. So what I'm going to do now is actually switch to the backup system and show you how I can get back to my all my files, and that file I just created 5 minutes ago, and get back to that and have this whole system up and running within a matter of minutes, and not having to worry about where my data is going to come back. Have I lost all my data? Because it's all been securely backed up with Datto technology. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to this screen. So this is what we call a Datto Cirrus device, and this is what's been backing up the actual systems and all the different servers. Now, what's been quite interesting is, because I've actually set this to back up every 5 minutes, the latest backup, our technology actually looks for a sign of ransomware. So looking for a large number of files that have been changed, those ECC extensions that you saw, and because we can alert and find this, we can actually send a notification to Chris and his team, and they can just start to see what's going on. We still back it up. We still back up the data, because there might be data on there that hasn't been infected. So we'll still back that up. So what I'm going to do is actually go into that server I was working on there. That workstation is completely dead. Now, Chris's team will actually, remove all that, rebuild it all for you, and that will take time. But you guys need to get on with your data, on with your work as quickly as possible. So I'm going to go to the restore section here. And what I'm going to do is actually go to that machine, the one I've been backing up, and you do something called a local virtualization. And as you can see straight away, that the actual copy that I took at this time actually has suspected ransomware. So that's not the copy I want to use, because that's already got ransomware. So if I start going back and go back to this one, that one is clear. So I can actually hit the start restore button. Now, what I'm going to do is take a minute or two to start up. But what I'm actually effectively doing is actually, because I've taken a full copy, a full image, if you will, of that particular server, This technology actually has the power to boot up that server locally, and we can do it in the cloud as well. If we have a natural disaster like a fire or a flood, we can boot it up in the Datto cloud as well. And what you can see on the screenshot on the right hand side, it's actually booting that particular server up. Now, if I hit up open in browser, that was great timing. As you can see here, I can now log on to that particular server or PC. And this is where I usually forget my password. So let's hope I get this one actually right. Not bad. And as you can see, go for here. And what you can see here, this is back to the way it was. So if we go to the My Documents section, all my files are back there. I can get them back up and running, no problems at all. In fact, there's that document I actually created at that particular time and date. So as you can see, within literally 5 minutes, I've been talking for 10 minutes. Literally within 5 minutes, I've infected a complete server ransomware machine. It's all been ransomware, it's all been encrypted. And within 5 minutes, I'm actually back up and running again. And what we do is try for this continuity piece. Now, obviously, the PC or the server in the background will need some remedial work, but you guys can just carry on working and obviously leave Edge IT to actually sort that, rebuild that machine back to you, and then restore all the changes that have been made on this system. And to be honest, that's as simple as that. And to say thank you very much, Simon. And I think I hand back to Louise, I believe, for submit any questions that you guys might have.
Okay,
I'm going to
Jamie.
join in this one as well. I'm not,
Thank you very much.
This one.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie and Simon. I really enjoyed that. I did before I went. So history now. So I'm a former clerk before I joined Edge, but before that, before children, I worked in IT, and I did disaster recovery. So I'm familiar with it. And yeah, I used to. It was in the old days when we used to roll up with a caravan outside and load all the tapes onto.
Yeah.
onto
I remember those days well, Louise. I remember those days well.
Yes. So right, I'm going to hand over to Chris now. But thank you very much. Really enjoyed that.
You're very welcome.
Well, firstly, Simon, I'm ever so sorry for my comment. I didn't realise I had my mic unmuted. But the sentiment was absolutely spot on.
Yeah. No
How?
problem.
Why would somebody like Microsoft think it was acceptable to provide a service where you're responsible for dealing with it when they get hacked? Sorry, not us. They get hacked. Come on.
Yeah.
It's please, Microsoft, if you ever listen to this, you can do better than that. And we obviously got the solution with Datto. And for everybody else listening to this is why Datto are here. You would assume, wouldn't you, that you would be protected, and you would be wrong. So we use Datto to actually recover if we have any problems with our SaaS. So Jamie said a couple of hours. Jamie, it's 70 minutes. That's how long, when we do the drill, if we lost the entire data center in Coventry with all of our physical servers, it's 70 minutes it takes us to fail over into Datto and spin the service up. How do we know it? Because part of our service includes escrow. So the escrow company actually put us through an annual drill. They record it. We give them the instructions. They actually do the failover. So everybody listening on the call here, when you are using Advantage and Epitaph, not only are we using Datto technology, we're also doing it included within it that if we as a company cease to exist, it's the Datto technology will allow you still to use Advantage SaaS and Epitaph SaaS, and that's what it is, it's software as a service, for a 60-day period. And then in that time, you can download your data and your programs. It comes with a 12-month license. And that's even if the Edge company ceased to exist. And we build that in. And we couldn't do any of that without Datto. Now, we're not planning to go out of business, but you can just imagine that more likely the biggest challenge we got, particularly at the moment, is we have power cuts. And we're in a building where our landlords caught me out the other year and they said, have you got anything to confess? Is there anything in the building that you shouldn't have? I went, we got a generator, I said, for the data center. I was given 10 minutes, generator was out the front door. So if we get any power cuts this year with what's going on, and there's a possibility, it could be the first time in our history that we will fail over because we won't have power to our data center, because it's a small data center. It's not a tier sort of 2 or 3. And we'll fail over into Datto until we get power back. So my team, even more on guard at the moment. And it's the Datto technology that enables us to do it. 70 minutes, that's enough. We will know within 5 minutes whether we've lost the service. And my team are on standby to do it. So what Jamie and Simon have been talking about is using the same sort of technology, but to protect the 365. The bit that you thought was protected, because it must be protected, because no one would ever put it in the cloud without protecting it, would they? Yes. So everybody listening to this, if you haven't got Datto SaaS protection, this is what you actually need. And if you're a clerk that's got your own particular favorite program that's installed on your local machine, possibly from one of our competitors who don't provide cloud software, you can actually get the Datto continuity software that will actually protect and back up your machine in the same way that actually Simon just demonstrated. It's only possible because of one thing, not Edge, not Datto, but because actually we have the internet. If we didn't have the internet, we probably argue wouldn't have half the threats, and you would be right. The internet is here to stay. So we can actually use the internet, not only to actually obviously deal with the issues, and we can help protect you against being ransomware, but also to use that same internet to back it up to Datto, be it actually from your local machine to Datto, or it's from that nice, secure Microsoft server to Datto. And we wouldn't be able to run our business without Datto, and that is a fact. Because
I was going to say, Chris, you raise a good point as well, because it's, I think what you're talking there with, if you had a complete outage from your data center, that's obviously a macro scenario there. But even if it's down to more of the bespoke and one of your customers, that 70 minutes really comes down to, can be 10 minutes, 20 minutes that you've got that person up and running. So down to your individual needs as well, it's incredibly quick and really designed to minimize any impact to your day-to-day in that respect. So it does scale. And again, like I was saying, from the kind of the ransomware piece today, unfortunately, even with a good security posturing in place, the preventative part, no vendor out there with security boasts 100% capture rate. And the reason for that and the challenge that they face is even those that have 99.9% capture rate of the bad stuff, unfortunately, even though that's a really good statistic, when we consider there's over 500,000 pieces of new malware created on a daily basis, it's all automated now, unfortunately. That's a lot of people that need to get hit first, which is why I kind of lent on that. It's being prepared for when rather than if scenario today, because it's a numbers game and there's just a lot of it out there, unfortunately.
There is one question that's been asked in the chat, if I might pose that.
Please do.
Nigel's asked it. He said he's curious to know if that was a sandboxed VM, but a real example of encryption.
Sure, I'll take that one. Yeah, absolutely, Nigel. I saw your question there. It's a great question, actually. So yes, absolutely, it's a sandbox VM because obviously I don't want to affect the network it lives on, which is actually, it's not on Datto's network. It's a private demo environment, but that is a real version of CryptoLocker version 3. So it's a real piece of crypto ransomware. But what you saw actually happen was actually for real. So it wasn't a smoke and mirrors and wasn't a simulation either. So it's real ransomware. You're very welcome, Nigel.
Another question, which was in the situation where you realise you've got ransomware and you're kind of like looking around, and even if you've got backup protection, is the thing to do to shut your laptop down or your equipment down straight away?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can, shut your laptop. If it's a laptop and it's on a Wi-Fi network, then shut it down. Just turn it off. Hold the power button down. Don't just shut the lid because that could put it in sleep mode. So actually hold the power button down until it turns off. If it's a desktop PC, I don't know, there's many out there now, but then turn it off and just take the network cable out as quickly. If you see that red screen, because that's what it tends to look like, just do that as quickly as possible. It will actually stop it spreading to another person. Or a whole network on that one. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, and it's the reality today. Ever since the WannaCry hit the NHS, that was the first worm ransomware, which is the ones that can spread across networks. So it's a real reality, and it might be the case. Let's say ransomware's hit your server, and if you're protected by Edge and underlying the Datto business continuity solution, you might find that actually Chris and the team are calling you up to say, we removed your server from the network.
Yeah.
We're now doing this to get you up and running, and they might be telling you that it's been taken offline rather than you having to enact that.
I mean, increasingly these days, Jamie, we are finding that the number of town and parishes that actually have local servers is a dying breed. There's still some, because the legacy investment and some software vendors that don't understand that the cloud is an appropriate place to put their software. But it is getting less and less. We have first-hand experience of crypto ransomware type attacks, both for ourselves. We had it must be about 8 years ago before we had the technology, and we had a client that actually got it as well. And as you say, it's the length of time it takes to recover. We work on the basis that it's not actually stopping it, it's a question of when it's going to happen, and when it happens, what you're going to do about it. So we're always prepared for the worst case. So we're not going to be putting our head in our hands going, oh dear, what do we do? It's going to be, okay, that's business as normal, let's get it done. And we can only do that because of actually what you're doing at Datto. So we're going through ISO 27001 at the moment. And so I was kind of sort of smiling a little bit at actually when Simon was saying, oh yes, and we've got that virtual machine on a private network away from the Datto service, because I just imagine writing the quality standard saying that we have a secure service and we have this small area full of infected machines. Mm-hmm. And the answer will be physically move them somewhere outside of all the infrastructure. We do not want the possibility of any cross-contamination. It's a great thing to do, and I've seen the demo before, but it kind of makes the point. The cloud is great, but you need the right technology for it. 365, fantastic, but you need the SaaS protection, and you need the data continuity protection of the PCs as well. Unless you can go entirely cloud-based, in which case it's just the SaaS side of it. And we wouldn't be able to provide, particularly with our crematorium software, and supplying our crematorium software to principal authorities here in the UK and the private sector. They absolutely expect us to have this for disaster recovery. And we use the same technology we do with Datto for our enterprise clients as we do for our town and parish. You're all the same as far as concerned. You get the same level of protection. And it means it makes it that much easier for my team to make sure that we're confident. And we can, in the meantime, if somebody has a moment, shall we say, in the software where I wish to confess, 6 months ago, I did delete this item out of the database. Can I have it back? You know what? Yes, because we use the in perpetuity backup option within Datto, which means we've got month-end backups going back to the very first day we started with Datto, and we can get that back for every single one of our 10 administration products. It makes a huge difference. If it's in the last 6 weeks, we can do it on the hour, no problem at all. And this is the Cirrus product that we actually use. Fantastic. Makes our life much, much easier. And the technology is superb. So, Linda, are there any more questions at all? Nope. Okay. Simon and Jamie, thank you. We are recording this. We will be sharing it. It is the sort of thing that anybody watching this, and please, everyone, bear in mind, you do not need to be a client of our Advantage or our Epitaph software to benefit from Datto. We are Edge or a Datto business partner. We can supply it to you and be very happy to supply it to you, especially if you're using one of our competitors' software, because we can show you actually what we can do. It's there to protect you. So if you've got some on-premise installations, we can sort that out. And we have quite a lot of IT support clients that then become, in due course, customers for our SaaS software for Advantage and Epitaph for Cemetery. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, and we'll be speaking to you hopefully in the future.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and everyone for giving their time. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll be sitting and listening myself.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.